Hi and welcome to the first episode of Read With Me. I am Tika Masuku and I'm a human geographer and workplace strategist. In my work, I help organizations around the world creating better workplace experiences for their people and their business. Now, I often get asked two questions. What is human geography and how does it apply to workplace strategy? Now, this is one of the reasons why I've started this series called Read With Me. These two terms, human geography and workplace strategy, they might sound like difficult academic terms, but they're impacting our lives on a daily basis, big and small. So human geography is very much about the interaction between people and place. It's an interrelationship that we have about how we as human beings experience places and how places are being formed around and for to support the human behavior. And in workplace strategy, we can utilize all of those insights from human geography to create better workplace experiences. And that's what we do through creating workplace strategies. So with this series, I'm excited to share with you some of the books that I've read that have really helped and shaped how I view the world and some of the frameworks that we can apply to the world of work and place to enhance the spaces that we are in. Now, we'll kick the series off with a book called Topophilia, written by Professor Yi-Fu Tuan in 1974. I've chosen to start with this book because of several reasons actually. So 3 reasons. The first one being it's written by Professor Yi-Fu Tuan, who is seen as one of the early pioneers in human geography, in the field of human geography as how we know it now, in the more modern times, so to say. Secondly, because I love the title, so Topophilia. Topo means place and philia means love. So this book is about the love of place. How do we human beings develop certain attraction and meaningful connections to place? It's very much looked at our spatial experiences from a positive perspective. And thirdly, this book is, even though it was written in 1974, it's actually very apt for the times that we are living in today. Because nowadays we spend so much time online on our phones, on our laptops for work and video conferencing, that we could ask ourselves the question, what's the role of place in the digital age? And therefore, if we can understand how we create meaningful connections to place, it might give us an insight into how we can understand our relation to place in this digital age that we are in. In 2024, I've done a lot of keynotes on Topophilia, which was based on this book, relating this into the era that we are living in today. So that's the last reason why I wanted to start with this book, as it's a very good foundational piece that will help us as we go through this journey of exploring the field of human geography and applying it to the world of work and place. So yeah, come have a read with me. I hope you will enjoy this series. If any questions pop up throughout this first episode, please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear from you and hear your perspectives as well. Today we will kick off with the first 2 chapters of the book Topophilia. The first chapter is the introduction of the book, but it's actually really quite interesting. So I've decided to include the introduction into this first episode as well. And then the second chapter is about our senses. So it's called Common Traits in Perception, the Senses. So it's about how we experience the place through our senses and what makes us as human beings unique as a species, about how we experience place. Human geography is not just all about understanding place, but it's very much about understanding ourselves. And I hope you will find that exploration as of much interest as I have found it. Now, in the first chapter, Yi-Fu Tuan shares a little bit about some of the places that he's been that are of meaning to him. and some of the places that he has lived. And as human geographers, it's really important to be curious about where people come from, what places they have visited, and how they've basically moved through life geographically. Because that really shapes, it's part of what shapes how we see and interact with the environment. The author, Professor Yi-Fu Tuan, he shares a camping experience in the book where he went to the desert, the Death Valley in California. And the interesting thing here is that often, perhaps for some of us, when you hear the desert, you may have certain connotations with that. Decay, barren, maybe even death, that might associate with desert. Where, for example, if you think about the rainforest, words may come up like, lush. And for him, he associates the desert with a generosity of mind and spirit. And the rainforest is to him more associated to decay and death, because there's so many things, that are growing there and at the same time decaying, and it's this complete ecosystem happening. Every person will have different associations to different spaces. And the word that he uses for this is the psychogeographical factor. What are the psychogeographical factors that might come into play about how we experience place? He also gives the example that in the time perhaps that he wrote the book, I don't know if it's still the case, that a lot of Englishmen were attracted to the desert, perhaps being attracted to the opposite. So coming from a lush country, being attracted to the desert. It might be why the Burning Man is of such attraction as well, Burning Man Festival. The definition of topophilia by Professor Yi-Fu Tuan is the following. Topophilia is the affective bond between people and place or setting. Now, in the introduction, Yi-Fu Tuan says that the book Topophilia provides a framework of all the different ways that people can develop a love of place. Now, for me, I grew up in the Netherlands, and cycling in our villages and cities, it's very normal to drive through paddocks on both sides, having cows and sheep that are peacefully grazing. Which is something I, at the time, did admire, but also kind of took for granted as well. I could very enjoy the environment, but it was something that was also quite normal at the same time. And when I moved to Australia, close to 10 years ago now, when people said, do you miss your home country? My first response was, I don't really miss the country, but I miss the people, I miss family and friends. But over time, I've come to really appreciate the actual environment as well, as it is so unique. When my husband and I now go on holidays and see family and friends in the Netherlands, it is something that I particularly appreciate when we drive through the paddocks and see the cows and the sheep. So now that gives me a sense of topophilia, a love of place, because of beautiful memories I have there. Topophilia is very much about understanding ourselves. And with that, it's time to delve into chapter 2 of the book. And chapter 2 is about perception. So how do we perceive spaces? How we experience place is a complicated thing, because yes, we are experiencing place through the information that's coming through our senses. And there's actually so much information coming through the senses that our brain and our perception of place, we can't possibly perceive all of those bits of information that's coming through our sensory apparatus, because it would be way too much for our brain to process. So we actually experience a tiny little bit of the information that is coming through all of our senses. It's one of the reasons why we would all experience a slightly different reality, right? You might be in the same space, but two people will have a different type of experience. In the book, though, Yi-Fu Tuan focuses on what is it that we have in common as human beings. And then in particular when we compare ourselves to the animals. So what is it that we all have in common instead of focusing on the differences? So of the 5 senses that we have, the vision, the eyes are the most important sense. That's where we receive most information through. But what is really unique about our eyesight? Well, it's as much about what we can see as about the things that we can't see. For example, we can't see ultraviolet rays or infrared rays, but we are really good though at discerning color grades, which is pretty nice, as well as being able to see three-dimensionally. Seeing in 3D is actually something that is a skill that we develop. So when we are not born with the ability to see in 3D. And it's something that we develop over time in the first year or so of our lives. Professor Yi-Fu Tuan then goes on to describe about the tactile sense. And that we often say that we are in touch with the world. And it's literally and metaphorically very apt. Touch is also a sense that can be developed over time. Now, when we relate that to the workplace, it got me thinking of my parents. So for a long time, my parents owned a fabrics and haberdashery store. And Yi-Fu Tuan actually mentions in the book that there used to be professional cloth feelers. They were so good with, feeling what type of fabric it is. Because if clients come up to them and be like, oh, is this cotton or is this something more of a synthetic fabric? They would feel the fabric and know exactly what type of fabric it is. So in certain jobs, certain senses might be more enhanced than others, and therefore it might actually alter the experience of the world that you have, because those senses are more developed than other people. Now, when it comes to hearing, we as human beings are actually not that good when we compare ourselves to animals. The range of our hearing is not that large, and most of us also can't really, change and turn our ears to tune it in the right direction. But it's a good thing as well, because if we could hear a wider range of sound levels, we would be able to hear our own heartbeat, for example, which might not be very comfortable. Professor Yi-Fu Tuan describes is that we are most attuned to hearing a child's or a woman's cry. How does this then relate to place? He describes that we see the world through our eyes, but we engage with the world much more through our ears. So our ears are more related to the emotional feelings that we have, or that places and spaces can bring up in us, than compared to our vision. Think, for example, about when you are watching a movie and then turn off the sound. It's much less intense, or it's much less of an immersive experience when you only have the vision. Professor Yi-Fu Tuan gives a very interesting potential explanation for that difference, of why that is that we engage the world through our ears much more emotionally than our eyes. And he says that we can close our eyes, but we can't shut down our ears. So perhaps that makes our hearing much more sensitive than our eyes. So when you relate this back to the workplace, when I undertake workplace experience surveys, noise is something that usually comes up in the top 3 challenges that people have as part of their workplace experience. It's too noisy. I can't concentrate, I can't focus on my work. Or it could also be that when there is absolutely no sound at all, that can also be eerie. So noise, we are so sensitive to it, and it's very hard to have the right level of noise in the workplace so that there is enough of a vibe going on without disturbing people, but also not that it's eerily quiet. And then we also have the sense of smell. Now, Professor Yi-Fu Tuan describes that the olfactory sense is often a sense that is forgotten about. Now, keep in mind that this book was written 50 years ago. Nowadays, the sense of scent is something that's much more front of mind, and in shopping center experiences and hotel experience, because nowadays brands do develop their own scents to hone in on that, creating memorable experiences where you connect a memory to a certain scent that you have, and even in office buildings and workplaces. An example for me is the scent of eucalyptus. Now, eucalyptus trees are native here in Australia, but whenever I catch their scent, it actually reminds me of summer holidays in the Netherlands. So when my sister and I were young, whenever we wanted to play outside in the warm summer afternoons, my mom would apply mosquito repellent that smelled of eucalyptus before she let us run wild in the paddocks. So it's fascinating how this smell that is native to Australia gives me fond memories of the Netherlands. I really love that scent, and now it carries and connects to important places in my life, which is quite special. Now I'm curious to know what places bring up fond memories for you. What places are there that you visit that you can feel that sense of topophilia? At the end of this chapter, chapter 2, Professor Yi-Fu Tuan gives a final reflection of our senses. But before we go into that, I would like to ask you to like this video if you like it, subscribe to the Tika Masuku channel, and of course ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date on future Read With Me episodes. Back to the interesting takeaway of our senses. Professor Yi-Fu Tuan points out that our sense of sight differs from the other senses. And I believe there is an important takeaway here for how we experience place in the digital age. So he gives a few reasons. First of all, seeing is more objective. So we are often saying, seeing is believing, and stands out from some of the other senses that have much more to do with our emotions that we spoke about before. And the second reason is that at the same time, seeing is more distant and abstract. And he gives an example, and I'm actually going to read it out. The eyes explore the visual field and abstract from it certain objects, points of focus, and perspectives. But the taste of lemon, the texture of warm skin, and the sound of rustling leaves reach us just as these sensations. Now, reflecting on all of this, it appears to me that just through the eyes, we don't get to fully experience the world. It's the combination of the information received from all of the senses that we truly get that immersive experience and meaningful experience in the world. Now, when we apply what we've learned in the first 2 chapters to the world of knowledge work, it's very interesting because these days, a lot of knowledge workers spend most of their time on individual focused work. That means that these people are spending a lot of time interacting with screens, often writing emails or working on reports. And what senses do we use to undertake those activities? It's mainly the sense of seeing. Of course, we will also feel. It's not that we don't use the other senses, but as we interact with people through email, for example, the communication that takes place in that email communication is mainly through engaging with the eyes, the vision. And we are lacking all of the other senses in that communication. So if you're spending the whole day mostly interacting with a screen, we might say that we are in a somewhat sensory deprived world. So how can we make sure we still fill our experience cup throughout the days if most of our work is at a slightly lower sensory rich experience? So perhaps it is that outside of work we do more effort to engage ourselves meaningfully in the world, or perhaps even if you're a remote worker, for example, and work from home 5 days a week, how can you build in a little bit more variety in your days? For example, by working from a cafe, perhaps one morning every week, or signing up by a co-working company to work from there for 1 day a week, just to mix it up a little bit. Now, this concludes the first episode of Read With Me. I hope you have found this of interest. I hope there were a few things that you could take away from this. Please let me know in the comments if you've got any thoughts or questions or things you would like to know more of when it comes to human geography. These were just the first 2 chapters of the book Topophilia. There's so much more that we will explore, and I can't wait to take you on the journey as we read together and explore the field of human geography and the intersection of workplace strategy. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.